Hey everyone, welcome to MEE Live today. It's been 1 week since the attack on the Minab elementary school in Iran. This attack was on a Saturday, the same day US-Israeli attacks were launched against the country. Now, this bombing led to the killing of at least 168 people, and the majority of those killed were girls aged between 7 and 12, according to local officials. Now, calls are growing for an independent investigation into the bombing of the Shajrah Tayebeh girls' school, with UN experts denouncing it as a, quote, grave assault on children. Both the US and Israeli militaries have acknowledged this attack, and for their part, US investigators probing the bombing believe it is most likely that the US military was responsible for the strike, though they have not reached a final conclusion. Additionally, and this is according to exclusive reporting by Middle East Eye, the girls' school was hit by what's known as a double tap strike, meaning the site was hit twice, with the second missile striking after the first and killing survivors who had sought shelter. To discuss this and more, we are now joined by Daniel Hilton, head of news at Middle East Eye. Daniel Hilton, thank you so much for coming on MEE Live.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you, Daniel. Daniel, I just want to start off by asking you, through our reporting, what do we know happened at that elementary school?
So I suppose our reporting began around 11 o'clock UK time on Saturday when we first started getting indications from the Iranian media that a school had been attacked in southern Iran. And at that point, the death toll was about 20 children, and we broke it and then sort of kept on following up throughout the day, and the death toll just kept on climbing throughout the day, and in fact the day after that as well. Um, it was right in the middle of the very beginning of America and Israel's war on Iran.
It was the first day.
It was the first day, exactly. It was within the first few hours of the day. This school was attacked, and so like clearly it was like a major incident amongst like a huge historic event of global proportions. So we were able to kind of sort of report on the incident in three ways. One was kind of sort of monitoring what was coming out of Iran through official channels, which so you have to take with some sort of a pinch of salt, but also you had local officials who were releasing information, and we also looked at sort of footage that was coming out on social media. So on Telegram groups and sort of other sort of social media platforms, there were videos that were purported to be of the school immediately after the strike. And then we also used our own network of sources in Iran. I have a fantastic colleague in Tehran. He was able to very quickly get hold of a member of staff at the school who had stepped out of the school moments before the attack and then sort of returned to find like utter devastation. So from that, we've sort of continued to kind of report on what we've seen through satellite imagery, what the Iranians are saying, what our sources on the ground are saying. We've spoken to medics at the scene who were rescuing people. We've spoken to the parents of children that were killed.
And just on that note, Daniel, because it was through our colleagues in Tehran that we were able to report on that exclusive story about the double tap strikes. Is that correct?
Exactly. So, um, what we've been able to ascertain, which nobody else has, because we've been speaking to people on the ground, like in Minab, is that there was a strike on the school, and I want to sort of make clear it looks like it wasn't just a girls' school. That there was we've looked at lists of victims. About like half of them appear to be young boys as well as young girls between the ages of 7 and 12. Um, And it appears that a strike struck the site primarily, and then the teachers and the principal took a load of the students into the prayer hall. And once they got them there and they started calling up parents, asking them to come and retrieve their children and take them to safety, the school was struck again, and most of the survivors were killed in that second strike as well.
I have a quote here from the story. In the story, we have Rohullah, who says his daughter survived the first attack and then was moved to the prayer hall, as you were saying, before she was killed in the second. And one of the striking quotes that Rohullah says in the story is, quote, "She used to tell me, I promise I'll become a doctor, so you won't have to pay medical bills anymore. I would hold her and say, you're already my little doctor." There's more striking quotes in the story, but this is just one example.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I mean the level of agony is
Mm.
indescribable in Minab at the moment. I mean the scenes that people were telling us about, and the devastation that has been left since the strike is indescribable. The medics and parents described to us arriving at the school and just sort of finding limbs scattered everywhere, sort of unrecognizable bodies. It has to be said that around 60 of the children that were killed have still not been identified because their remains were too badly damaged, too badly burnt, too badly blown up. So DNA testing is ongoing, we understand. And parents have told us that they were only able to recognize their children through bracelets that like their daughter was wearing, or a school bag. Yeah, the situation is just terrible.
And just to remind our viewers, Daniel, for those who don't know, what exactly are double tap strikes?
So double tap strike is a kind of informal term. It
Mhm.
tends to mean an attack where a site is struck by an airstrike or artillery, and then there is a pause where people will flood into the site, usually in a rescue effort. Often these are civilians, or they are rescue workers, medics, and then there'll be another strike shortly after that targets the people who came to help, or and to wipe out any survivors that there may have been.
Mhm.
Now,
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
think this term sort of really began to be popularized during the Syrian civil war, because it was a tactic that was routinely used by Bashar al-Assad's government, and also the Russian military. And it was well documented in social media footage and that kind of thing, that from activists on the ground. But more recently, we've started
Mhm.
seeing that actually the belligerents in this war have been using it as well. So Israel has been accused of performing double tap strikes on civilians in Gaza,
Mhm.
and the United States has been accused of doing the same on ships in the Caribbean, with its kind of sort of conflict with Venezuela. And it should be noted that double tap strikes are a war crime, because you are intentionally trying to target people who are coming in to help. You're intentionally trying to target civilians a lot of the time, and rescue workers.
And have we seen any other examples of a double tap strike in this war on Iran thus far?
I wouldn't say any necessarily confirmed with video footage, but there has been a lot of testimony, or some testimony, coming from Iran. I've seen at least two video clips where very distressed survivors and witnesses of attacks, of airstrikes, have described in one clip, for instance, that just sort of watching an attack and then people rushing to help, and then being watching another attack happen. There was another clip of two young men who described themselves going into to rescue some people, and then being buried under rubble when the second strike
Mm.
hit the scene.
And again, back to our reporting in terms of what the first responders have been describing. I guess what are the most prominent factors in that or points about that?
I suppose that there was very, very deliberate strikes, very precise. The school was adjacent to a Revolutionary Guard complex
Mhm.
and a clinic in which all of the kind of buildings, or sort of the majority of the buildings in that area, were hit directly. And sort of, on Wednesday, some commercial satellite imagery was released from the scene, and we could have a real clear look of like what the area looked like after the attack. That corresponded a lot with what we were being told by our sources on the ground, which was that places were hit once, perhaps twice. That like it was very deliberate, that it was very precise. You don't see any um, evidence of explosions or strikes in areas that are adjacent to a building. They're sort of very, very targeted attacks, and including on a medical center, it seems, which would appear to constitute another war crime.
You mentioned the Revolutionary Guards. I'm sure you've seen the numerous tweets and statements online that were speaking on the fact that this was actually a rocket fired by the IRGC, and not from the U.S. or any of the or Israel, the belligerents in the war. But what do you make of these statements? I believe it has been debunked.
Yeah, I mean, sort of social media is awash with a lot of
Sure.
false information at the moment.
Hmm.
A lot of AI generated videos, old videos, and that kind of thing, and also there are a lot of people who have vested interests in spinning a narrative one way or another, and so it was very disappointing to see in Britain some really, really prominent figures immediately starting to push the narrative that had come from really spurious accounts on social media, that it was perhaps a Revolutionary Guard interceptor missile that went astray, or the Revolutionary Guard had admitted to bombing the school themselves, without checking any of the kind of sourcing and that kind of thing. We've had sort of prominent journalists, media commentators, historians, a very sort of famous British Iranian actor who has
Hmm.
pushed this narrative. And unfortunately, it seems to be the par for the course in, like, the 21st century, that people will push these kind of sort of false narratives and sort of use spurious evidence. But it was a shame that people aren't able to sort of pause and reflect on the tragedy of 150 or more girls and boys being slaughtered, than trying to kind of sort of spin it to shape their political narrative.
And for their part, what have the U.S. and Israeli militaries have been saying about this attack?
So, they started off by saying we don't have any information about that. Very stringently saying we would never target a school.
Mhm.
And I mean, although of course we've seen Israel target schools time and again in Gaza. And then, as kind of sort of more evidence come out, more reporting like our own, there's been more pressure for them to investigate, which they both say they are doing now. Um, the United States' own internal investigation appears to be revealing that it was a US strike on the site. Reuters reported that that's what they were sort of coming to, and they were coming to that conclusion. But the investigation is not yet over, so they're sort of indicating that there may be some piece of evidence that sort of disproves that. But notably, that area of Iran is somewhere where the United States has been operating heavily. The Israelis not so much. And from a personal point of view, it seems that the issue may have been that whoever was behind the strike was using old intelligence. The school was part of the kind of Revolutionary Guard complex around 10 years ago, but for 10 years it's been sort of obviously a school, very clearly marked, demarcated away from the complex, as the medical clinic was. Um, and we do know that the Israelis have incredibly good intelligence in Iran, and so and have penetrated Iran for many years, and conducted many very precise attacks, which makes me think that if it's bad intelligence, it's more likely to be a bad American intelligence.
And you were speaking about Israel bombing schools in Gaza, and I bring this up because if we look at the records of both of these militaries, the U.S. and Israel's, it's very much not an isolated incident when it comes to striking civilian facilities. I'm even if we even go back in history, I'm thinking of 1970 when Israel bombed an elementary school in Egypt. Bahr al-Bahr is what it was called.
Mm.
And then there was also in the 90s when the US bombed what appeared to be a civilian shelter in Baghdad. And again, you mentioned Gaza and the genocide of 2023, the unprecedented levels of attacks on educational facilities. So it's not an isolated incident if you look at the record of these militaries.
Yeah, certainly not. And it would be interesting to see the level of contrition that the perpetrator expresses, if it ever does, the United States or Israel do acknowledge that they were behind the attack. And I would also say that, like, it's important to see how much pressure is placed on the United States and Israel once they do, because it's been quite shocking. I found how little coverage
Mm-hmm.
the attack on the school has received so far, particularly in the first few days, when I think it could have really given pause to the way that people were viewing the war, perceiving how the war was being fought, and might have sort of shaped the way that events are unfolding. Because we did a story yesterday detailing dozens of civilian sites that have been either hit on sort of damaged because of strikes nearby, or directly targeted over the past week, which includes hospitals, it includes sports complexes, it includes a UNESCO World Heritage Palace, and dozens and dozens of residential buildings. I would like to see some sort of real sort of pressure and introspection
Mm-hmm.
about the toll that this war is taking on civilians.
And it kind of leads into my next question. I was going to ask you if there's anything that surprised you about this horrific attack.
Um, I mean, the scale of the attack is really terrifying, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's such a sort of huge loss of young life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I s- I'm surprised, as I said, that people seem to be not sort of highlighting it as much as they could. I've been surprised at how little some people seem to care on social media, and to sort of use the attack as a way of pushing their own narratives, and sort of using these girls and boys as deaths for their own political ends. But Yeah, it's just a tragic situation.
And we're going to leave it here. Daniel Hilton, thank you so much for coming on MEE Live. I appreciate your work and I appreciate your time. And for our reviewers, make sure you continue tuning in. We will be continuing the coverage as we go ahead. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Mohammed.